R.I.P. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Park Ridge Sports History. This is Will O'Toole welcoming you again to another edition. This week, I'd like to go over the legendary status of Jerry West. He had a great NBA, he also had a great Olympic, and he also had a great college career with the West Virginia Mountaineers. And I'd like to take a different perspective on West. Of course, he was nicknamed the Logo, as I just showed at the top of the show. The NBA logo that's been in place for at least 40, maybe 45 years is modeled after Jerry West. And in fact, I do have a picture, I think, and of course, one of his big rivals, Oscar Robertson, and one of also his allies on the 60 Olympic team, Oscar Robertson. But you kind of can see where they got maybe the idea for the NBA logo using Jerry West as the model. I don't see it anytime soon being replaced at all because it's just one of the most really iconic logos in all of corporate in all of corporate business world. And I love the MLB one too, although apparently that was not really modeled after Harmon Killebrew, although it does look at it, does resemble the silhouette of Harmon Killebrew. Others have said it's Ted Williams, and still others have said it's Pete Rose. All three of them you can't go wrong with when you think about it. All great players during their time, all legendary players for their respective teams, the Twins, the Red Sox, and of course, Rose with the majority with the Cincinnati Reds. But I want to devote a little bit of time also to, this is Father's Day that I'm doing this on, and I'd like to revisit and have some fun with the perfect game that Jim Bunning spun on Father's Day 1964 against, of course, the New York Mets. And I'm going to take it from a different direction because when I was doing some studying on it, I realized that Johnny Callison homered in that game. And he is one of three players to homer in the game to homer in the perfect game of his teammate, and also homer in an all-star game. And of course, the others are obviously Mickey Mantle in the 56 World Series game for Don Larson. He also homered in the 56 All-Star game. So the All-Star game home run came before the home run in the World Series. Callison's, of course, came in June 20th, 1964, and then a couple of weeks later at Shea, he hit that dramatic 3-run home run to rally or help rally the National League to a big win over the American League when the All-Star game really meant something. And of course, the third one's really going to surprise you. I'm going to save that. Hopefully I'll remember to do it because I just get so involved with other things. But I will tell you that one. But it's only happened 3 times where there was a perfect game spun and the guy who hit a home run in that perfect game also homered in the All-Star game. So it's kind of interesting. All right, let's get through. I have a resume. Well, I have a resume. Remind me to do the Yankees as well. I was doing a little study on the Yankees today, which should make you Yankee fans very happy and kind of make up for, remember, I was the voice of doom last year when I told you that the Yankees were not going to make the playoffs as early as Memorial Day, and it turned out to be true. And I based that on all my statistical research using their previous seasons in Major League Baseball. Well, today I'm going to make you happy, baseball fans, particularly of the Yankees. Well, I should just say Yankee fans, because the Yankees winning their 50th game at such, by their 72nd game just bodes well for their success in the postseason. So you'll enjoy that as well. But before I get to that, I just want to go over a little bit of Jerry West. First of all, never knew this. West was from West Virginia. Went, of course, to West Virginia University, where he led the Mountaineers to the championship game in 1959 against the Cal Bears. And of course, Pete Newell was the coach of the Cal Bears, and they defeated West Virginia in that. West Virginia actually got the 3 NCAA tournaments with Jerry West. First of all, West was just an unbelievable player, both on the high school level, on the college level, on the Olympic level, and also on the pro level. He is still to this day the only player in the NBA Finals to be named MVP from the losing side. Of course, that occurred in 1969. In fact, in Game 7, probably to seal the deal for the MVP, he actually had a triple-double. He had 42 points, 13 rebounds, and 12 assists, even though the Celtics, led by Bill Russell as both a coach and the center, defeated the Lakers again in the championship round of the NBA playoffs. But when you think about it, now this is before the three-pointer, West was responsible for 66 points of the Lakers' offense that day in Game 7. One thing that, and really many quote-unquote critics or analyzers of the game of basketball will tell you is that West had an unbelievable eye for talent as well. And there are some who argue that, yes, forget him being such a great player. He was a better evaluator of talent. And he did save the Memphis franchise from moving by acquiring a couple of players and keeping them in the playoffs. He acquired Kawhi Leonard for the LA Clippers, although they never won a championship with him on the team. But he saw something in Leonard. And, of course, I got a buddy who says he's probably one of the best players, and just is many times is so overlooked. But a great player, and it was West who saw him. You got, of course, other players to help that Clipper team, but they never got really to the promised land in the NBA, to the NBA Finals. But it was still under West's direction that he made the Clippers into something. And of course, did a remarkable job with the Lakers, not just as a player, but later on as a general manager. Of course, he was probably the man in charge of many of the Laker championships. And he does win a couple of championships on the court as well. I was a Laker fan way back when because I loved Chamberlain. I didn't like the Knicks, so I was upset when they lost in 1970 in Game 7. And people forget this, but in Game 5, I believe, West hits a half-court shot to send the game into overtime. I'm pretty sure it was Game 5. And it was a game that eventually the Lakers lost. But had the three-point play or the three-point shot been in effect, West would have won that game, and who knows? Things might have turned differently for the Lakers. They did finally win in 72, so they got that off their back. They do lose in 73, but I was always happy that they won in 72. And, of course, that season was marked by their 33-game winning streak, which, of course, was ended, I'll never forget, on a Sunday afternoon by the Milwaukee Bucks and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, besting the Wilt Chamberlain and Jerry West-led Lakers, ending their 33-game winning streak. But really, when you think about it, all that 33-game winning streak, remarkable as it was just a foreshadow of their NBA championship that season. But West played, and I did want to talk about his NBA career. I did not know this, though. He's chosen all 3 years that he's at West Virginia. West Virginia finishes actually as the number one team in the AP in his final in his sophomore year. They go 26-2, then 29-5, and 26-5. The year that they went 26-5, they get to the Final Four and the championship game and lose to Cal. But along the way, they used to play in the Southern Conference before they went to, they played so many different conferences. They actually played in the Eastern 8, then they played in the Atlantic 10, then they joined the Big East, and of course now they're in the Big 12 Conference, West Virginia. And along the way, when they were in the Big East, they did make the Final Four with Sean Butler. and didn't win. That was the year that actually Villanova and West Virginia made the Final Four for the Big East. So it was really a surprise kind of year for the Big East. But anyway, ready for this? Along the way, they would beat in West's career Richmond, which was ranked number 19. They would beat number 5 Kentucky and number 1 UNC in the year that they would finish number 1 in the AP before going into the NCAA tournament. They lost to Manhattan at the Garden in the first round that year. So they beat the number 19 team, the number 5, and the number 1 team, UNC, in 1957. And of course, UNC would win the championship that year in overtime over Kansas University, or University of Kansas, led by Wilt Chamberlain. The following year, they go 29-5. They lose to Kentucky, which was ranked number 10. They lose to Northwestern, which was ranked number 12. And they beat Tennessee, which was ranked number 14 that year. And then in the NCAA tournament, they play, in 1959. They beat Dartmouth at the Garden. They beat number 14 St. Joe's of Philadelphia. They beat Boston University. And then they beat Louisville, and then finally lost in the Final Four championship game to Cal, which was ranked going into the tournament as number 11. In 1960, they're 26-5. This is West's last season with the Mountaineers. They lost to Cal, which was ranked number 3 during the season, beat Villanova, ranked number 9, and then in the NCAA tournament, they beat Navy and lost to number 12 NYU, and then they used to play in a consolation game in the regionals and also in the finals, but in the regionals, in which they beat St. Joe's in the consolation game. Actually, that NYU game that they lost to the 12th ranked Violets, they lost in overtime. Then, of course, West is chosen number 2 in the draft that year, 1960. The number 1 guy in the draft, Oscar Robertson. So you have 2 premier guards taken 1-2. Not only that, but they're Hall of Famers. They do eventually win NBA championships. But what was kind of cool was they were also teammates on the 1960 Olympic team. Let me just get some pictures here so you don't have to see me. But here's West and here's Robertson. Here's what I love about these old Topps basketball cards from the 1969, 70, and I think this might be 71 or 72. Notice that I don't think they got permission, Topps, to put the names or to have the fronts of the jerseys to be photographed. So what they did, they just reversed them. And of course, Oscar Robertson is wearing his Milwaukee Bucks uniform in reverse. And of course, didn't occur here. Here's Jerry West wearing, yes, West is wearing his as well backwards. I had to make sure about that myself. But it's kind of cool. And like I said, they were number 1, number 2 in the draft. They are also teammates on a 1960 Olympic team that, to say the least, just obliterated all of their opponents. The closest team that came to within maybe earshot of playing competitively was the USSR Soviet team. But on that team, it's interesting, and I'm using all 1969 and 1970, Darrell Imhoff, who was also selected. He was actually number 3 that year in the 60 draft. He was selected. He would go on to play center for the Philadelphia 76ers. And as I was making photographs or copies of these basketball cards, it dawned on me, these are the 69 cards. I do remember having them, but the 1970 cards I remember as well, which were really the same. Big cardboard, really thick cardboard, and they were larger, almost like postcard size, but very narrow. And they really were solid. And to make a long story short, I could never tell the difference. And then I realized, the 69 brand has all of these generic or stylized basketball players surrounding the picture. And of course, once again, here's Oscar Robertson wearing his Cincinnati Royals jersey with number 14. It's reversed with his the number which is normally on the back. Now he reversed it and it's on the front. It's unbelievable. But those were two of the members of that team. Ready for this? And this is just a side. And only I want to show this because I might forget. Paul Popovich, who would go on to play for the Cubs and I think the Pirates and the Dodgers, was actually a teammate of West on the West Virginia Mountaineers ball clubs that went to the NCAA tournament. So that's Paul Popovich, who was a member of the West Virginia. It just goes to show you how I always laugh at these guys who think they could do what these athletes do at the major league level. Even quote unquote, well, what we would term the tomato can. The tomato can players are they're lights out better than any of the best players you've ever seen in the sandlots, any of the players you've maybe competed against as weekend warriors, either on the softball field or on the basketball courts. And Paul Popovich, who was just a serviceable utility player for a number of teams in the late 60s and 70s. I remember him being on the Cubs. I do remember now he came up with the Pirates. He always reminded me, I could never really tell the difference between Beckert and Popovich. To me, they were almost like the same player. But, here's a guy who may have lasted 6-7 years in Major League Baseball. And he was an okay player. And he's basically a teammate of one of the greatest players in NBA history. And it just goes to show you the athleticism that this guy can play both Division I or top-notch basketball and then Major League Baseball and actually call a guy like Jerry West a teammate. And that was Paul Popovich. Just want to give you a couple other guys that were on that 60 Olympic team. Bob Boozer and Walt Bellamy, of course. Now, these are 1970 cards. And the reason you can tell the difference, obviously, they don't have the stylized players. Boozer was a good player. I think I remember Boozer. He was actually did a show on Boozer and Walt Bellamy. I might have even done a 1960s Olympic special on those players. Bellamy was a solid player, played probably what you would consider he was a center, but today he would probably be a small forward. He's about 6'7", maybe 6'8", played for the Hawks. Hawks had some pretty interesting talent on their squads in the late 60s, early 70s. Guys like Lou Hudson, Pete Maravich. Later on, it would be Tree Rollins. All right, not great players, but definitely like Bellamy, solid player. Maravich probably was a player beyond, light years ahead of the talent he played with. Lou Hudson was a scoring machine. Good players, just can't get the Hawks over the top. And, of course, one of the last guys I do remember, Terry Dissinger, who played for the Detroit Pistons. And, of course, there's Fred Schoss, who was the coach of Jerry West on those Mountaineer teams. And I do want to kind of circle around to Fred Schoss, who was really a pretty good coach. No, not just a pretty good coach, a really good coach. Interesting guy, too, because Fred Schoss played in the NBA. And when I was doing some research on this, I didn't know this. Fred Schoss is the only player to lead his team to an NCAA championship game, an NIT championship game, and an NBA championship game. He's the only coach to do that. And of the three, he was able to win the NIT with the 74 Boilermakers. In fact, he had a pretty good career with the Mountaineers. When he first joined him in 1954, he would win 19 games. Then in consecutive years, he won 21, 25, 26, 29, 26 games. Would leave at the end of 1960 when West becomes an NBA player. And he goes and coaches the LA Lakers. And he's there a few years, then returns to the colleges and picks up with Purdue. And with Purdue, he goes 15-9 his first year, then 21-9, 17-11, 16-11, 19-9, and 16-11. In fact, he led the Boilermakers to the 76-77 NCAA tournament. And he wins the NIT when it was a big deal, even in the early 70s. He won the championship. In fact, I'm trying to think, he may have beaten that year in 74. He might have beaten, I want to say, like either Providence or Princeton. Let me just see. He goes, and at the Garden, he beat North Carolina, which was ranked number 8. And of course, they didn't win the ACC tournament. Beat Hawaii, beat Jacksonville. And then beat Utah. So 4 really good teams in 1974 that he defeats, and wins the NIT. Fred Shaw's. Okay, interesting guy. Was a winner on all 3, won over 200 games in the colleges. Kind of, it's funny when I look at this particular picture. If you took the uniform out and put West in a regular, let's say, outfit, wouldn't they look like the 1960s versions of our astronauts for NASA? That the same kind of look. The crew cut look, the crew cut haircut, and just the look of the astronauts. And I was a big NASA guy. I loved the astronauts. I loved the fact that we landed on the moon so many times. Just really boggled my mind why we went from the moon to Space Lab. But that's another story for another day. All right, turning. Now, I'm going to use Popovich as our segue to talk about baseball here. And the reason why I want to do this is because, first of all, you Yankee fans, please be very happy with what I'm going to announce. I know you weren't too happy when I declared that the Yankees weren't going to the playoffs last year because of their record at Memorial Day. But be that as it is or as it was, I was looking at the Yankees, and something that occurred to me last night. They were talking about the Yankees winning 50 games and that they have been 30-10 in their last 40 games to get to 50 wins. Now they are currently, I just want to make sure, they're 50-22. So they've been 21-9, I think, over the last 30 games. With that being stated, the Yankees, now I'm only taking the years that they went to postseason and really focusing on the years that they played in the World Series. But ready for this, the best record that they ever had by attaining 50 wins, they did it by game 65. And that was 1939. And of course, they blitzed the Reds in the World Series. They actually got off to a 50-15 start that year. Pretty much this. They are 50-22 right now. On 2 other occasions that they won the World Series, the Yankees were 50-22. So if they're 50-22 at this juncture in the season or better, that means 50-21 or 50-15. They were actually 50-17 one year. That year was 1998. They were 50-17. And remember, that year they got off to a 1-3 or a 1-4 start. That was the year that they won 114 games. So pretty remarkable about that. But anyway, they've been 50-15. They've been 50-17. They've been 50-20, 50-21, and 50-22. So when they've been 50-22 or better, they've won 6 World Series. They're 6-2. So you're in pretty good shape. In fact, ready for this. The most games they had to play before, and this is before they added all the playoffs. So this is just pennants on both sides. They had to go to 89 games in 1922 to get to 50 wins. So they were 50-39. They lost the World Series. And as I said, they only had to get 65 games to accomplish 50 wins and win the World Series in a 1939. Okay, during the years that they just dominated in the 40s and 50s. Ready for this? They never had. They were 50 and 31, 50 and 26, 50 and 26, 50 and 32, 50 and 34, 50 and 32, and 50 and 22 when they won 6 or 7 World Series in a row. Not consecutively, but in a row. So 43, 47, 49, 50, 51, 52, 53. All right, they were 50 and 22. They get back up. They were 15 and 24 when they lost the World Series to the Dodgers in 55. But then they get right back up on the horse, go 50 and 26 and 56. And in 1957, they were 50 and 26 and lost. And then 50 and 26 in 1958, and they won. Here's the point. Yankees are in good shape, whether you like to hear it or not. Obviously, they did get off to a 50 and 18 start in 2022, and I know that's probably what's bothering many of you Yankee fans right now, and lost in the playoffs that year. But they've also had this. Probably the worst, one of their worst was 2000, when they attained 50 wins after the 91st game of the year and won the World Series. So they were 50 and 41 and won the World Series. And they do have one other year, 1978. That's the one that really kills everybody. They're actually 50 and 48. 50 and 42 in 1978. And of course, win the one game regular season playoff game against the Red Sox, then defeat the Royals, and then defeat the Dodgers to secure that championship, 1978. Pretty remarkable. So, Yankee fans, you're in great shape. Now, turn my attention to perfect games. And I was reading an article today that was revisiting the Father's Day perfect game of Jim Bunning. Now, I'm just going to hold up some of these cards. So, here is Jim Bunning, Hall of Famer. Here is Johnny Callison, who happened to be, I would say, my two older brothers, probably one of their favorite players, probably because when we were growing up, you have to understand something. The All-Star game has lost some of its luster and uniqueness because of interleague and the fact that we've had teams switching leagues, and really the fact that you can watch any team any night on television. So it's lost its lure. It's lost its, I don't know, it's just kind of like star-studdedness. And the reason being is because you can see all these great players every night of the week instead of waiting. Now, we were spoiled here in the Northeast because we were able to see the Yankees and the Mets play all these teams pretty much every night on television. And if we didn't get them on television, you were listening, obviously, on radio. But we, being a city or an area of both National and American League teams, we got to see every player, or were aware of every player in both the American and National Leagues. You can't say the same if you were out in Kansas City as an Athletics fan, or in Cincinnati as a Red fan, or Cleveland as an Indian fan, or in Atlanta as a Braves fan. You only got to see, at the most, National League teams, unless, of course, you watched the game of the week that was 2 o'clock on Saturdays, or they used to turn their attention in the early 70s, about 72, 73, I would say, actually 71, to Monday Night Baseball. But then again, you're only seeing 2, quote-unquote, out-of-town teams twice a week. And we were lucky because we were able to see the Mets and the Yankees play all those teams. But in 1964, so here's my whole point. In 64, Johnny Callison hits a dramatic 3-run home run in the 9th inning. I don't think there were 2 outs. The National League had rallied, tied the game in the ninth, courtesy of Willie Mays' legs, and his great baseball acumen. He ties the game. Callison hits a 3-run home run to win the game. I think he did it off a Red Sox reliever. And the National League prevails 7-4 and continues their winning streak against the American League, which will only be snapped in 1971 in that great All-Star game at Detroit Tiger Stadium, a.k.a. Briggs Stadium, with a host of future Hall of Famers playing in that game. That was a great ball game just from that perspective of all these great Hall of Fame players, future Hall of Famers being there. All right. That being said, Jim Bunning, on a very hot day, June 20th, 1964, the Phillies, of course, were the story at that point because under Gene Mauch, with the emergence of Richie Allen, Johnny Callison, Heroics, and other players, the Phillies, which had not really been relevant since the early 50s as the Whiz Kids, now suddenly saw themselves not just in a pennant race, but leading the league. And of course, they would collapse at the end with 12 games left and a 6-game lead, they would just fold. And of course, it was actually Gene Mauch, depending on the pitching brilliance of both Jim Bunning and Chris Short, pitching them without giving them any rest, that led to the Phillies just falling apart and actually losing not just to the Cardinals, but actually finishing third or tied for third with the Cincinnati Reds with 92 victories. People forget that the Reds were kind of in that pennant race in 1964. But Jim Bunning spun a perfect game that day, beating the New York Mets 6-0. And in that game, Johnny Callison hits a home run. Now, why do I say that's so significant? Well, Callison, of course, like I just said, is one of only 3 players to homer in both a perfect game and an all-star game in the same year. The other 2 being, of course, Mickey Mantle in that classic in 1956 with Don Larson. And ready for this, former Yankee Melky Cabrera doing it in the game that Matt Cain spun in 2012 when he defeated the Astros 10-0. At first, I thought it was going to be commonplace because the first 2 guys I did happened to be Mantle and Johnny Callison. And then all of a sudden, I was like, wow, don't tell me. I was looking for something unique. And then all of a sudden, I was like, wow, I got the first 2. Don't tell me this happens quite a bit. But it didn't. And so you get these 3 guys, Melky Cabrera, who that was his only all-star game. In fact, Cabrera hit .348 that year, had a terrific season with the Giants, would see himself out of San Francisco the following year and playing for Kansas City. But that would be the only all-star game he appeared in. And he had a ton of fun in that game because hit a home run, had a couple of hits, a couple of RBIs. Johnny Callison, of course, was a star in the 64 game. I think he hit 30 home runs for the Phillies that year. And Jim Bunning, of course, had a great season in 1964. And, of course, here's the thing. Mantle does it, and it really shouldn't surprise too many people that Mantle did it. And the reason being is that, there are just some players, and, of course, I just mentioned Willie Mays, probably a guy like Ted Williams, and Stan Musial, and Joe DiMaggio. Mantle was the iconic athlete of the 1950s. Handsome, rugged good looks, Midwestern flair, right? Either came right off the cornfields or right out of the Great Plains of Oklahoma. Really kind of like a Norman Rockwell type of figure, and then plays for the greatest franchise in all of American sports history, the New York Yankees. And has the boyish everything. And here he is, even at the height of Larson's career, Mantle has a say in the game, hitting the home run that puts actually it's the game-winning hit. And in the game because he hit it off Magley, 1-0, gives the Yankees enough wiggle room to win the game. They do win it 2-0, but it was Mantle's home run and made and this I forgot. Mantle also makes probably his greatest catch in his career in that game to preserve the perfect game. But Mickey Mantle. And it's kind of cool. Like, here's the kid who has the storybook career with the Yankees, winning all those championships, the Triple Crown, home runs galore, all the covers of the magazines, TV, etc. And then you get a guy like Melky Cabrera in his greatest season ever, helping out Matt Cain in his perfect game. And, of course, a solid player, because Callison would go on and have a pretty good couple of years with the Cubbies. And I know he did play with the Mets. But Callison was a pretty good player. Yeah, maybe not Hall of Fame, but he's a pretty good player nonetheless. And even in that moment, he had his moment kind of like Mickey Mantle. Mantle, of course, would hit a home run in the 56 All-Star game. Callison, probably his great moment, hitting that home run in the All-Star game. I would say this. Mantle were still alive, he would probably say that 56 game was probably the greatest game he ever played. Hit the home run, had the great catch, and just the whole World Series against your arch rival, the Dodgers, in a perfect game scenario. At Yankee Stadium, I can't see him not at least listing that as one of his 5 greatest games he ever was either a part of or played in or actually was a member of. Okay? Now, I just want to do some fun here in the last couple of minutes and talk to you about this 64 game because I think it's a lot of fun. Ready for all you Met fans? They led off with Jim Hickman. And here's Jim Hickman. Now, anybody who knows anything about Jim Hickman will tell you this. He makes the All-Star game in 1970. It was his single, Up the Middle, that drove home Pete Rose, where he has the collision, of course, at the plate against Ray Fosse. That won the game for the National League in that All-Star game, 1970, in Riverfront. But in the game against Jim Bunning, he led off. He was hitting .235. By the way, he had a great season that year in 70. He had 42 home runs, 120 RBIs, and I think he hit .315 for the Cubbies. But Hickman was 0 for 3, 3 strikeouts. Another All-Star for the Mets, and their first, who would also appear in that 64 game and start, was Ron Hunt. He also went 0 for 3 with a strikeout. And their third guy in a row was also an All-Star. His only All-Star appearance was in 1965, Ed Kranepool. He never got into the game that was played at Metropolitan Stadium. He went 0 for 3. Joe Christopher was having a career year, and I didn't get a picture of Joe Christopher, but I was looking at the Mets here. Ready? Hickman was hitting .235. Okay, would go on and have better years. Ron Hunt was hitting .329 as late as June 20th. Ed Kranepool hitting about his career average .254. Joe Christopher in his glory year was hitting .291. In fact, I think he hit 15 home runs for the Mets that year in 64. And Jesse Gonder, who was their catcher, actually was having one of his better years, if not his best year, was hitting .259. The other guys involved were Hawk Taylor, who hit .244, was hitting .244 going into this game. Charlie Smith, who actually had double figures in home runs for the Mets 2 years in a row. I think this year he hit like 13 or 14, was playing shortstop, was hitting .228. He was pinch hit for by George Altman, who would have 2 good years with the Cubs in 62 and 63. Actually, he's the last Cub to lead the league in triples, had a solid year in 62, had 12 triples and 27 home runs. Pretty solid year. And, of course, the pitcher that day, you can't make this up, was poor Tracy Stollard. He, of course, got the ball. He was actually, ready for this, went 5 2/3, gave up 6 earned runs, 7 hits, 4 walks, had 3 strikeouts. His ERA, not bad for the Mets, .419, but he was the pitcher of record. The other guys who were in the game, Rod Keneal, who was hitting .262 at the time, Tom Sturdivant pitched, and John Stevenson, who made the last out, striking out '71. Now, the reason I say this about Stevenson, he would go on and catch no-hitters, I do believe, for Nolan Ryan and X-Men. It's amazing how all these things are connected. From Jerry West, the Paul Popovich teammate, baseball teammate of Jim Hickman, who was involved in the '64 perfect game, and Johnny Callison, along with Mickey Mantle and Melky Cabrera, the only men to homer in a perfect game and also the All-Star game in that same season. This is Will O'Toole wishing you all a happy Father's Day, and see you next week with another Park Ridge Sports History episode. Thank you for joining me. Bye now.